There is a point in your life where working quietly stops being something that you have to do and turns into something that you choose to do. It's the moment where your income from your assets, your investments, your pensions, and all those sorts of stuff quietly covers the basics of your life without you having to lift a finger. That is the work optional threshold. And most people just never reach it. Not because it's out of their reach, because you have to go beyond it to eventually retire, but because they're staring so hard at that full retirement figure, they just walk straight past it without understanding how powerful it actually is. So let's think about what that finish line actually is. So when you say retirement, what you really mean is having enough passive income, money that kind of turns up without you working for it, to pay for the whole life that you want. Pretty simple, right? But the thing is, there's more going on in that figure than most people realize. Part of it is what's called your basic standard of living. So the lights, the food, the fridge, the bills, the roof over your head, the keep the wolf from the door type stuff. Then, sat on top of that, of course, is your discretionary spending, the things that you want. So your holidays, your meals out, the nice car, all the bits that make life enjoyable rather than just livable. So say that you've worked out that one day you would need £5,000 a month to fully retire. Well, like I've just said, that £5,000 isn't really one thing, it's two. So maybe £3,000 of that is the basics, the needs, the things that keep the lights on. And the other 2,000 is the good stuff, the discretionary standard of living. And the moment that you see it split like that, everything kind of usually clicks. I see this all the time in my one-to-ones when you actually break it down like that, because you don't actually need to cover all £5,000 to change your life. You ultimately just need to cover 3. That is the threshold. That's the point where your basics are handled every single month, whether you work or not. And honestly, like I said, I see this all the time with the people that I work with in my one-to-ones. The moment they realize that this point even kind of exists well before full retirement, the whole way they start to think about their career and what they're doing kind of fundamentally shifts. Now, let me tell you about the moment that this whole concept really, really landed and came alive for me. So let's go all the way back to COVID, right? Terrible times. One of my clients at the time, someone that I've been working with for years at that point, rings me up and he is absolutely panicking. And he goes, Josh, I've just lost my job. So he'd been laid off, and you can imagine the spiral, right? High-powered professional one week, nothing coming in the next. And he's saying to me that he's going to have to turn some income on from the investments that we look after for him. So the very next day, I sat down and worked out a bit of a plan and how much we could actually safely pull from the investment pot that I managed for him without doing sort of any real damage to the long-term sort of future of it. And that came out to around £2,500 a month. And I rang him up, and when I told him, there was this pause in the line, and he goes, well, that's ridiculously spooky, because it turns out the night before he'd been sat at his kitchen table working out what his kind of worst case number was, the absolute bare minimum that he needed to like keep his household running, and it was about £2,500. That wasn't to live like a glamorous life. It was just to give him and his family the things that they needed rather than wanted. So the very next day, I turned on that income for him. £2,500 a month landing into his account, covering all of his basics. And look, just like that, the pressure to go out and find some big salary just to cover his needs was pretty much gone. Now, here's where it gets interesting. I circled back with him like a few months later, once it had all settled down a little bit and he was calmer. And he was still a bit rattled about his career and was kind of still working out his next move and all that sort of stuff. But he was keen to get Max back in the mix. And he was like, I've got this business idea. I think I'm going to give it a go. I'm not quite sure. I'm not sure it's going to pay me anything near what I was earning, but I've got my basics covered, so I'm not sweating every single month to make ends meet. Now, fast forward to today, what, 5-6 years later? That one little idea that he started, the one that he only really had the nerve to try because that kind of immediate looming fear was off the table, it's worth literally millions now. Like literally millions. And it throws off way more income than his old job kind of ever did. Now, look, I know how all of that sounds, right? Incredibly privileged. We're not all in that position. Not everybody's sitting on a pot that they can just switch on like that to give themselves that headroom. I totally understand that. But if you strip away the numbers, this lesson holds for everyone. The day your basics are covered by passive income, truly passive income, you can start saying yes. Yes to the risky move. Yes to giving the business a go. Yes to dropping one day a week to actually be around your kids maybe. We spend our whole entire lives treating work as kind of like a non-negotiable thing. And the work optional threshold is the moment it stops being the thing that your kind of survival depends on. And that freedom is the bit that kind of most people don't anticipate or plan for or see coming. Because everyone's fixated on that long-term dream, aren't they? The full, golden, never have to work again retirement. And that's a good goal, don't get me wrong. But there's a long road and an awful lot of money sat between where you are now and that. And somewhere on that road is a threshold that hands you the most freedom for literally a fraction of the price. So the question is, how do you actually find that number for yourself? Well, it starts with getting brutally honest about your basics. Not talking about designer clothes, not eating out twice a week. Your real, genuine kind of floor, your basics. What does it genuinely cost you to exist every single month with the lights on and food on the table for you and your family? Now, there is literally no right or wrong answer here. I'm not going to give you a figure or a sum. It's different for everybody. But until you know that figure, you have got zero to aim at. Now, once you've got it, the maths is way simpler than a lot of people make out. Let's just say that your basics come to around £2,000 a month, right? So that's £24,000 a year that you need. The question then is how much you need invested or saved to throw off that £24,000 a year, more or less forever. Because this is a really key point here. What we're not talking about is just living off a pot of money until it's completely gone and depleted. We're talking about a passive, sustainable income that keeps coming in forever. Well, the absolute cleanest way to size all of this up is the 4% rule. Now, people tie themselves in absolute knots over this, but it's dead simple. Whatever you've got invested, you could probably pull out around 4% of that a year, and broadly speaking, kind of not worry about running out of money. So just flip that around and it hands you your target, that target that you need to aim for. So take your yearly number, your £24,000, times it by 25. So £24,000 a year times by 25. That's the factor, that's the figure. And you get 600,000. That is it. In this example, £600,000 invested is your work optional threshold. Hit that and your basics are covered for this example. Now, here's a key point, and I can already see the comments. Is 4% gospel? No, of course it's not. Now, people will argue endlessly over this. Some will tell you, well, the genuine safe withdrawal rate is nearer 3%. Others reckon that you can pull out 6% or whatever it might be. I think I actually saw Dave Ramsey or someone else talking about that, about you could take out 10% a year from your investments because the stock market over the last 15 years has returned 10% a year, something crazy like that. That's not true because he's not factoring in sequence of return risks. But anyway, we digress. Not sure about any of that. But honestly, the bluntest, most effective tool, okay, as a back of an envelope figure to aim at, the 4% is just fine, okay? So don't let arguing over decimals stop you from actually starting. Now, here's the part that really decides how fast you actually get there. And it's a bit that I think that most people just skip right over and don't really focus on. Before anything else, you need to pick your target age, your threshold age. When do you actually want to become work optional? Because the answer completely changes where you should put your money. Someone aiming for this at like 45 has a very different job on their hands to someone that's happy to get there at, 60, something like that. So if you want to retire early, say or not retire, if you want the threshold early, say at 45, obviously what you can't do is lean too hard into a pension, because you can't get a pension until you're 55, and that's rising to 57 shortly. So a good chunk of your money has to go somewhere you can actually reach at 45, like a stocks and shares ISA, which of course, remember, is just an account that you can invest into that makes anything inside it grow and pay out completely free of tax. But of course, if you're happy to wait until you can access a pension, then go hell for leather into that one. And this is actually the point where it starts to really pay off, because of something that most people, again, just never stop to think about: tax drag. See, if you are a high earner, broadly speaking, every pound that you make in that high rate tax threshold, you're only going to keep about 60p of. The rest is gone in tax before you've even saved or invested a thing. So imagine this, right? You can sort of see where I'm going with this. Trying to build a £600,000 pot out of money that's already been taxed, you've actually got to earn way more than £600,000 to actually get there. Like over $1 million if you think about being a high rate taxpayer. But a pension cuts that drag out completely. The money goes in before the tax man takes his cut. So you earn £1 and £1 goes to work for you in your pension. And that gap, the gap between what you earn and what you actually keep, is like the single biggest break on most people's wealth. A pension just lifts it off. It absolutely is a great way to do it. Now, of course, there are some taxation considerations with pensions when you go to take money out, but the leverage between the tax that you pay, the tax relief that you pay on the way in versus what you get on the way out, what you might pay on the way out, that's the arbitrage that we need to aim for. So yes, I understand pensions are not tax-free, but that upfront loading of trying to get ahead, it's a golden weapon. So now you know your number, okay? You should broadly. And you know roughly which pot to be building it in. The last piece is just working out how much you need to put away each month to actually hit it. And the good news is that I've got a free app for you to exactly do that. And you can use it free. There's a link in the description down below. All you need to do is pop in the income that you need to cover your basics for this case, where you're starting from, what you've got invested, your age, and when you would like to become work optional. And simply enough, it shows you a monthly figure. Now you can play around as well a little bit with the rate of return that you think you're going to get, but a little bit more on that in a second. Now, if that number looks a bit scary at first, don't let it put you off. Because here's the thing that you can do, or a couple of things that you can do to bring the stress of that right down. Now, we've already talked about the big one, which is keeping more of every pound you earn by running it through a pension instead of just handing it over to taxman first. But the other one that people walk straight past, and this shocks me every single time, is employer matching. If you are employed, this is an absolute gold return weapon, again, like I said, because if you're paying into a workplace pension, your employer will usually match whatever you're putting in pound for pound up to a certain limit. It might not be a fortune, but honestly, this is the leverage that you need. And if you're not taking that in full, you're just turning down free money. It's about the only place I know, or the only place I know, where you can double your money the day that you put it in. And then the next thing is where that money actually sits once it's in that stocks and shares ISA or once it's in that pension. And this is the bit that most people play far too safe with. See, if you've still got years and years to run before your threshold point, then time is your greatest asset. And the way that you put time to work is by leaning more into growth. Money that's invested in things like the stock market, rather than just sat in more cautious investments or even just left in cash in a stocks and shares cash in the cash ISA. Because over the long stretch, that leaning into growth, into things like the stock market, that is where the returns come from. And the gap between playing it safe and investing your money might only look like a couple of percentage points a year, but a couple of percent compounded over 20 or 30 years isn't a couple of percent anymore. It's the difference between hitting your threshold in your 50s or hitting them in your 40s. And that is the real prize here, of course. It's not the bigger figure on a screen. It's years of your life handed back to you sooner. But I just want you to be really careful here. There is a line between leaning towards aggressively investing in growth in the stock market and speculative assets and just overly chasing it. And this is where most people that I deal with pretty much come unstuck, because growth doesn't mean piling into the wildest thing that you can get your hands on just because someone online promised you quick doubling of your money, like crypto and stuff like that. It means picking a level of risk that you can actually live with when the market drops. And it will drop, my friend, let me tell you. That's not a fault in the plan. Nothing's gone wrong. That is the price of admission for the long-term returns. Because a person who picks something sensible and holds their nerve through the falls beats the person who speculates on crypto or does something like that and then bails the second that it drops. That beats it every single time. So pick an investment that you can actually hold and then leave it alone. Just let the years do the heavy lifting and you will reach that work optional threshold way before you think you will. Now, of course, a critical part of all of this is understanding when you can actually fully retire, not just the threshold, but fully. I call it the rich ratio. Essentially, it's the point where, in my view, you become truly rich. Now, I go through it all in this video here. So give it a click and you'll be able to find out whether you're just well paid or you're actually converting that into something resembling true and lasting wealth. So give it a click and I'll see you there.